Welcome to the new project. Let's go. Maybe you know this kind of optimism when a new project begins, or maybe you say, well, the atmosphere in our team is actually quite different. And that might be heavily relying on if you had a proper kickoff or not. Today, we're going to talk about how important excellent project kickoffs are. Sometimes you have a bit of an office mentality where people basically say, okay, here's a PowerPoint slide, and we talk about who has to do what until when, and then we just move on. And sometimes you have a great moment during a kickoff where people are really motivated and committed to do the project at their best of their abilities. However, we need to see that the vast majority of project kickoffs are, let's say, substandard. They're usually quite boring. People are not motivated to do them. They're usually quite stiff. They're quite bland. And when you compare one to the other, you couldn't distinguish them when you don't know the project's name. So projects are daily business. While they are dedicated pieces, of course, in an organization, we are almost in some sort of project almost every single day of our working lives. Most of the projects, however, are not successful. When you look into studies and surveys from project management works, you find that only 39% of projects are successful, and they have a quite wide definition of what successful means. When you really look into what does successful project mean, you need more than the typical 3 to 4 factors you hear. So first, of course, it needs to be on time, obviously. Second one, on track, so you went the path that you actually designed to do before you started. Third one, on target, you want to reach the goal. However, then it has to be on or under the budget. That's where most projects actually fail. And the last one often is completely misregarded, and that is, did it actually deliver the value that was either expected or promised? So when you don't have the value at the end, the project can be successful on paper when there is when you implement a piece of software, but users do not adapt the software in their daily business, daily work life, then there is no success of such project. We now have to talk about how to deal with the situation we have in project kickoffs. Of course, first we have to talk about what do you need when you prepare one. Let's say someone says, here's a project, you need to organize a kickoff. First, of course, you need to have the objectives. What do you want to achieve with the project? And then, unfortunately, most people say, okay, let's sit down and create PowerPoint slides. And that might be an option. However, it's not the best one. The first thing you have to talk about is, the first thing you have to think about is, who are the team members, the direct and indirect team members, of course. With small projects, you usually only meet with a project team and a couple of people around. The larger the project, the more people you have to invite to the project kickoff. When you have really large and longer projects, you, of course, should invite the suppliers you have. You, of course, should invite the direct and indirect clients, or the internal, external clients you have, because you need to talk about what is this project about. Way too often projects start off and then many conflicts arise that could have been prevented very easily if we just had a good kickoff and talked about that before. So, of course, you also need the detailed plan. However, I've never seen a single project kickoff where someone says, oh, we don't have a project plan yet. Usually, these plans are very detailed. They get talked through. Unfortunately, they often lack a background review. Give you a very simple example here. One of my clients in Austria, they had a project kickoff. People were not motivated whatsoever to do the project. And what was the reason for that? Very simple. The company was acquired, and that was just announced the week before. Unfortunately, they only said, you were acquired. No one knows, will there be job cuts? Will there be expansions? Are we a partner? Are we a supplier? If it's a strategic move, are you going to close down the whole thing that you just purchased? Will we all be unemployed in a year? Do we have to move? Do I have to switch jobs? That was simply missing. And of course, no one is motivated when you just have a detailed plan, but you didn't do the background review. So any detailed plan needs to have a background review before you present it. Of course, you need to get the budget agreed, but that goes without saying. Usually you have a very detailed budget planning. And then, and here's the crucial part, when you want people to work together, and let's face it, something in the project will go wrong in one way or the other. When do people stop to be nasty? When do people stop to be a nuisance? When are people nicer to each other? And you usually come to one conclusion: when they know each other a bit better. So there's some sort of social connection. How do you get the social connection? You need social activities. And when you now say, oh, we don't have budget for that, which is the usual excuse I hear, I can tell you first, in the English-speaking world, there's a lot more culture for having a social activity. However, the always upcoming excuse that we do not have any budget for that. Do you have budget for delayed projects? Do you have budgets for projects that did not achieve the goal? Do you have budgets for projects that on paper were successful but nothing was adapted afterwards? I assume that all of these questions are answered with no. So when you don't have budget for that, you cannot say that you have no budget to make people work together better. But we get back to that in a minute. So be aware that you need to have some social activity, especially when things didn't go too well before that. I just give you a very simple example from one of my clients in northern Germany, where there was a change of leadership and the atmosphere was quite mediocre, to say the least. And then when a new project came in and the new leader came in, he said, first thing we do, we're going kart driving, go-kart driving, and then we go for dinner. That doesn't cost a fortune, and the whole team was immediately more motivated than they were before. So that is a very simple approach of a social activity. Of course, you can have a billion other activities, but simply saying there's no budget for that, please sit down, listen to my 78 PowerPoint slides in the next 2.5 hours, and then wonder why people are frustrated and not motivated. You can't be serious that you really wonder that this isn't going well then. So be aware, you need to be better than that. Now let's look into how to conduct, how to perform, how to deliver the whole project kickoff. First, you need excellent presenters, speakers, contributions. There's absolutely no time then people sit down and say, okay, here we go again. And the first speaker shows up and says, oh yeah, let me present this PowerPoint slide to you where I exactly tell you what's on the slide, what's written on the slide. I basically read it out. And then you have phrases such as, oh, the next slide might be a bit hard to read. So you know it's hard to read. You just don't care, obviously. And then you have Excel sheets copied into PowerPoint slides where you can't read anything, but someone rambles on for half an hour anyway. So you need to have excellent presenters. When you now say, and that is a typical excuse as well, when someone says, I am not a great presenter, hear the news, learn it. Many things we weren't great at. Believe me, when I did my MBA and we came to the finance part, I am not a finance person. I'm not a finance specialist. And if I had said, I'm not a finance person, first, there are no non-finance managers. You always have to do with financials. But when I simply had said, look, I'm not great at finance, they said, yeah, well, then you either learn or fail. So in business, it's exactly the same. When you say you're not a great presenter, learn it. It is a learned skill. It's an acquired skill, not a skill you're born with. So after that, you need to make sure that there's management commitment. Not every single project needs management commitment because some projects are not that relevant to management. However, especially important projects, it is always good when someone from the leadership area, someone from the higher levels of hierarchy shows up either online or on site, depending how important everything is. Then, of course, you get to the usual. You talk about which activities have to be done during the project, the timelines, the roles, the responsibilities, the accountability is very important than this. So you have some structure in your project. Please use WBS, work breakdown structure. Every work package has a number and every sub-step has additional numbers. So, for example, you have work package number 7, and then you have 7.1, 7.2, and maybe there's another sub-step. So you have 7.2.1. Please do not use more than these 3 levels. When you, for example, in a meeting after 3 months say, hey, could we please all go to work package number 14, step 3, sub-step 5. That's 7.3.5. Anyone can follow that. When you say, hey, could you please all look at 11.8.6.4.5. No one knows what you're talking about. So keep it to 3 levels of hierarchy when it comes to numbering. The next one, please use CPM, critical path method. Many people know what the critical path is. The critical path are all the activities that when they are delayed, the whole project will be delayed. You need to talk to people, and please do that before the project kickoff as well, not only during the project kickoff. Anyone needs to know which of my activities are in the critical path because they need to focus on them so they will not be delayed. Because when you delay them, the whole project will be delayed. But people need to know upfront which activities do we have in the critical path method. Another piece which now needs to follow, which is often completely missing, is the communication plan. Who needs to communicate when, to which person, with which contact, via which communication means, in which frequency. I'll give you a very simple example. So, who, Niels Brabandt, when, Monday the 18th of November, whatever, to whom, to Dr. Miller, on Mrs. Dr. Miller, on the C level, which content, project update, which communication means email or SharePoint, and which frequency, monthly or weekly or whatever you prefer. However, you need to agree how will you communicate. If you do not have a communication plan, and I can tell you in interim mandates, I do not start a single project without having a communication plan. Because if you do not have a communication plan, what happens is anyone has their personal preferences. Someone says, oh, I love Teams chat, so I'm going to communicate with you on Teams chat. Someone else sends you emails. Another one sends you WhatsApp messages. And someone else puts it on SharePoint or in a subfolder of Microsoft Teams. And then the catastrophe is going to unravel. So you need to set a standard where the whole team needs to agree to. Very important is you agree to that. It is not simply obey and order. So you sit down and then you talk about what are the means we have available, because we get more and more means of communication every single day. And with Microsoft Teams, the Teams chat is now added. So we have more and more channels, but we need to drill down to the most important ones so we all know which are the means we use for communications and which are the ones we will not use. Of course, afterwards, you then talk about risk, not only in communication, but in general during the project. And of course, there's always a Q&A. You must be able to answer questions from absolutely anyone. They have the right to ask questions because they want to be sure that we are all on the same page before we begin. The goal of the whole delivery of this kickoff is to create commitment. Create commitment amongst the people who will be part of the project. And when you now say, okay, when I implement this, getting back to this phrase, we have no budget. So first, I told you how zero credible this phrase is. We have no budget. You have no budget for any kind of delays or mishaps or missing goals. So you must have budget for social activities. However, what's not helping is when you simply say, hey, give me the money. I heard this podcast. Mr. Brabandt said this, give me the money. That's not how anything works. So first, please check with compliance and talk about, is there any kind of regulation? Because in many fields there are. When you work in the steel industry or the pharmaceutical industry or with public service, there are very strict guidelines what, for example, clients are allowed to accept. So check with compliance first. Second, talk to finance. When you talk to finance, you will find the pot where the money is, and then you can talk about how to get the money out of that pot into your project. Third, talk to senior leaders and executives, because you need to have support from other people who simply make that happen. Because you need to have budget, which you then can use not only for the project, but also for social activities in case of need. And after a kickoff meeting, or during a kickoff meeting, social activities are important. I can tell you from 2-day-long kickoff meetings off-site in great hotels. I remember one kickoff meeting, we went 3 days to Vegas. Why did we do that? It was a 2-year-long project with more than 400 people involved, and we all knew it will be very challenging and we will have very critical moments where we will probably all be very angry with each other due to the challenges. But when you know people, you simply are nicer to each other and you work together more closely. And I can tell you, 3 days in Vegas, we still talk about them, although all of this happened almost 15 years ago. So very important is when you then look into compliance, always check for regulatory and compliance, very important. Then set a very clear limit, because no finance department will give you an open budget. They will always say, okay, when it comes to these things, we do zero-based budgeting. You have to justify every single penny. Tell me what you want to do, and then you get money from there. And very important is please tell them this is not a one-off. Because I way too often have seen, oh yeah, we now do something for the kickoff, here you are, but next time we just do the meeting room thing with cookies on the table again. No, you won't. Every single important project needs an equally important and well-designed kickoff. I do not mean that every single tiny project must have an offsite of a couple of days, travel and flights, then a big party. No, it's meant for the most important ones. The smaller the project, the smaller the kickoff, the bigger and the more relevant and the more important the project is, the bigger and the more relevant and the more important the social activities around that will be as well. The bigger the project, the bigger the kickoff. Very simple. And by the way, when you then have all of that together, then you really have a piece of best practice for your organization. Please update that frequently, because many things change. Behavior of clients, for example, or expectations of clients. Also internal processes often change, organization change. And of course, the law, compliance, regulatory changes very frequently. So please update these practices frequently. Taking all this together as a summary, we can say excellent kickoffs always deliver excellent project starts. And you know what usually follows after excellent project starts? usually the project goes reasonably well, if not excellent. And even if you have conflicts, as soon as you have the social activities before and you have commitment and the social knots and ties between people, people will be way nicer and more productive to each other and get things done better than ever before. And with that, I wish you all the best and a lot of success with your upcoming projects. And when you now say, whoa, I think I have about 28 aspects which I need to discuss, very happy to do that. Just send me an email, nb@nb-networks.com. If you now want to talk about something very specific, you need a training session about that or a speaking gig, someone speaks at your conference or a coaching or whatever, we can talk about that as well. But we can also just talk about your aspects. Thank you very much, by the way, for the emails I received during the last weeks. I will put my email address in the show notes of this podcast. My LinkedIn can be found there as well. And you can also, of course, go to my website, nb-networks.biz, like business, biz. You find all of that in the show notes of this podcast. Also on my website, you find articles, podcasts, and the transcript of this podcast as well, in case someone wants to read that. The next aspect, and I repeatedly get this question over and over again, do we have live sessions? Yes, we do. When you go to expert.nb-networks.com, what happens there is you can put your email address in there and then you receive only one email every Wednesday morning. It's 100% content, ad-free guarantee. It's bilingual, so it's available in English and German. If you have international businesses, that might be very helpful as well. You find all the podcasts, all the articles, so the audio channel, the written channel, the transcript, everything. And on top of that, you find the date and the time when we are going to have our next live session. And also, of course, you find the link how to access the live sessions. The last live session is just 2 weeks ago, and that was the most visited one that we had so far. So it's growing with the audience, which I appreciate. Thank you very much for following me here. So I'm looking forward to being in contact with you there as well. However, the third aspect is the most important one. Apply what you heard in this podcast, because only when you apply what you heard here, you will see the positive results and the positive outcomes that you obviously want to see. I wish you all the best doing so. If you need any kind of help, contact me anytime. I'm available 24/7. And at the end of the podcast, there's only one thing left for me to say. Thank you very much for your time.